Greetings and welcome back to another episode of Cowlitz River Restoration. My name is Sarah and I'm going to be your host, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you how I took this wine rack and gave it a new vibe with some paint and some whitewashing, so stay tuned if that's something that you're into. Now, number one, it had these little holes on the top or with these metal things inside, and I thought about trying to pull the metal things out, but then I was like, I'm just gonna fill them and allow this piece to be exactly what it is, because it's lived a life, so to speak. And I think that maybe at some point it had a top on it, so I filled up those holes with the wood putty that I have, and then I went ahead and started sanding the top with a 150 grit sandpaper using my orbital sander. Now, I don't push too hard because I don't want to destroy the wood top, just enough to get that previous finish knocked down. I want to get it down to bare wood because, like I said, I'm planning on doing some whitewashing, and I also decided I thought it would be cool to add a little bit more wood detail to the bottom, so I went over the base with that 150 also. I then went over the whole thing with a 220 grit just to get it really nice and smooth before I brought it into my house. I wiped it down with a cloth to knock off some of that dust and to, clean it up. I don't want to keep going with dust on it. I need a clean surface. So I wiped it all down, brought it in the house, and then I washed it again with a vinegar rinse that I make myself. It's just 1 part vinegar, 1 part water, and a squirt of Dawn dish soap. It does the trick, it cleans it up, and then it's going to be all prepped and ready for paint as soon as I get this clean. Fortunately, this is a pretty clean piece. I didn't have to pull out the toothbrush or anything, just wipe it down with a cloth and it was good to go. I decided to go ahead and take out the back because how was I going to get in there to paint that? And you would have been able to see it when you put your bottles in or whatever you want to use it for. You would have been able to see the inside. So I took off the back part of the wine bottle rack and cleaned it all out on the inside as well. I took out the little rod that was in there and repaired it and put it back in so that it was a good sturdy surface to replace the back on. I then took some water and this drop cloth Dixie Belle mineral paint, mixed it up into a super watery mixture. I would say 2 parts water, 1 part paint. And then I used my wood stir angle brush to brush it on to the entire top. I put a pretty generous amount, just making sure that I got the top completely saturated with paint. After I had the entire top completely saturated with paint, I used that rag that you see in my hand and then I wiped it down. After I wiped it all completely down, I decided I wanted a little bit more white to it, so I just went over the top one more time, just kind of not as much coverage the second time I went over it, but a little bit of coverage, and then I again wiped it off to get that shade that I was after. I wanted the trim around the base to complement the top, so I did the exact same technique around the base as the top so that they would go together. Now that I've got the top and trim done, I've got to remove the door so that I can get to painting. It was kind of stuck on there a little bit, but with a little tug, I was able to get it off, and I just went ahead and removed the hardware. I decided that I liked the hardware. It went really well with the detail on it, so I'm going to stick with the same hardware. I used a dry sage in the Dixie Belle mineral paint on this piece. I like the coverage of it. I just started using Dixie Belle, and so far so good. I really like it, and so that's what I did. In order to get around all of the brass areas, like those little details in the corner, I just used an artist brush to do all that cutting in, because trying to paint and tape it off, it just seemed like it would have been a nightmare. So I went ahead and used that artist brush, and then for the rest of it, I painted it with my Woodster angle brush. I went ahead also and taped the inside, you saw me do that, so that I didn't have to do a lot of cutting in, but I wanted there to be a really clean line when you open the cabinet, that there wasn't like paint spilling over in a way that looked kind of sloppy. So I just taped it off so that I could just slather it on there without any worry of trying to cut in and making it perfect on the other side. Here you can see I make a little mistake getting some of that paint on the brass detail. Fortunately, with a little bit of a spit shine, I could wipe that right off. It wasn't a big deal. And then I just kept on working. So I used that angle brush to do all the cutting in around the top. I am a big fan of the Woodster angle brush when I'm cutting in around my refinished tops. It is a lifesaver. Another thing that I use a lot when I'm cutting in, depending on what the detail is sometimes I'll even pull out those like just tiny little artist brush, depending on what those details are. But I use the Woodster angle brush to cut in around this top. I also am going to use this same brush to cut in around the bottom. When you're cutting in, you don't want to overfill your bristles with paint. I just put a small amount on, and then I slowly drag my brush across the edge. And it can be pretty time consuming. You just kind of drag, and if you make a mistake or it goes over a little bit, you can use your finger and just wipe the paint off real quick. Not a big deal, and you just keep going. So I use the same brush to go ahead and paint all of the areas where we have the wine rack, and I did 2 coats. I never even switched my brush. I used the same brush to paint the whole thing. Sometimes I'll switch them around and I'll forget that I do it, and that's why I'm even bringing it up, because sometimes I'll switch over to a chalk brush. But this time I went ahead and used that same brush all the way around. I can't say I really like this paint in the fact that I feel like it goes on pretty even. I feel like it levels out really good, so like it's not super noticeable with brush strokes. It is water soluble, so if it starts to get really thick, which sometimes it will do, I can just mix a little bit more water in there and go from there. I have seen people use like a spray that they will put on, like they'll spray it down with water and then go over it again. That's supposed to help with brush strokes, so I might give that a try one of these days. I'm very interested in trying some of these new techniques that I'm seeing. So that piece that I took out, the wine rack, I of course painted that too. You saw me paint the inside of it so that when you're looking at it from the front, you're not seeing wood in there. It's all going to be one solid color. Because this has so many angles, I had to really like move it all around to look at it from every angle to make sure that I had good coverage so that there was no wood showing through, because that's not the style I'm looking for. I used a matte polyurethane, water-based, to seal the top and also to seal the trim around the bottom. So on the areas where there's that exposed whitewashed wood, that's where I did my polyurethane matte finish. I like to use poly on my wood finishes, especially on my tops, because I feel like it's got a little more durability than the finishing wax does. I used clear Best Dang Wax by Dixie Belle to seal all of the base. Everywhere on that. I used a wax brush to apply the wax, and then I wiped it down with a clean rag. This paint actually doesn't have to be sealed if you don't want to. It can be done and not sealed. However, I like to add a little extra durability by adding a clear coat on top, so I'm using this Best Dang Wax. They do have a couple other products that I'm interested in trying. They have I would assume that it was almost like a poly, like a clear finishing sealant that has kind of a poly texture to it. And then they also have something called Gator Hide, but the last time I checked they were all sold out, and I kind of want to try that too and see what I think about that sealant as well. So they've got some really cool products with the Dixie Belle, and I'm excited to try them out and see which ones I like the best. When you put the clear wax on, it does give it a little more of a sheen versus that super matte mineral paint finish. It also can deepen the color just a little bit, which is totally fine with me. You do want to be sure that you're not caking it on. A little bit goes a long way, so just a small amount will do. I like to really work the wax into my piece with my wax brush, and then I wipe it all down with the clear with the clean rag just to buff it out and make sure that I don't have any globs of wax anywhere. Because if there is globs of wax and they dry, it kind of leaves this almost like white residue. So we would like to avoid the white residue. But so far so good. I haven't had that issue with this wax. But be sure that when you're using your wax that you're working it into your paint. Almost like a lotion. You just kind of like massage it in with your brush. Sometimes if you are a little too vigorous, you can wear some of the paint down a little bit, in which case I would just use an artist brush and do a little touch up here and there. I can say that it's pretty easy to touch up the Dixie Belle paint and it doesn't like change the color of it. In my experience, it will go on and blend in really well. You won't even be able to tell that you touched it up. And you can paint over the wax with Dixie Belle too because it's water-based. Did you guys notice that super clean line when I took off that tape? It was pretty magical. I put the hardware back on. It all went on super textbook, super easy. I also put on the back. Again, went on super textbook, super easy as just putting in some screws. Getting rid of that cardboard because I don't need it anymore. I used a screw in order to drill the hole in the door so that I could put my knob back on. I thought that I was going to put a different knob on, so I actually filled the hole, and then I decided that I was not going to put a different knob on. Well, I did put a different knob on, but I decided to put a single hole on rather than a 2-hole. And look at what it did when I closed it. I thought that I didn't realize I needed to paint the inside. I'm not a fan of closing the door and then seeing a stripe of wood. So I took my handy dandy painter's tape again and I made a nice clean line along the inside, and then I took my Woodster brush and I just wiped it across that line. I just worked it in so that there wasn't a wood line when I closed the door. This paint dries super fast, so literally within an hour, 2 hours, I'm ready to take that paint off. After I took off the paint off. No, I'm not going to take off the paint. I'm going to take off the tape, for crying out loud. Follow with me, okay? Follow. So, Big Mama butter. It's not butter, it's butter. So, Big Mama's butter in Orange Grove. I went ahead and put that all along the wood on the inside. It smells delicious, it conditions the wood, and it will just make it look nice and new and pretty again. So here's my beautiful top, and again I used that dried sage in the Dixie Belle paint. I'm so pleased with how this turned out. I absolutely love it. I just flipped it in the marketplace for my asking price, so that was pretty exciting. If you enjoyed my tutorial, please like and subscribe and stay tuned because I have a lot more coming out for you. This is my job as a stay-at-home mom, so lots more to do, not to mention all the house projects that I am constantly doing. So like and subscribe, Cowlitz River Restoration. This is Sarah, and we'll see you next time.